It's an extraordinary portrayal of three women in a family unable to say what they feel and what they think. Eilish Lacey seems to be another character in a long line of characters you've written about who practice self-denial a lot. Are you drawn to stories like that?
Yeah, I think the novel lends itself to it in one way, in a way that the stage or the film don't, in that you can actually capture one thing that's going on in someone's mind and one thing that's going on in the world, and they're not the same thing, even though they probably should be, and that they create a gulf between them which sort of feeds on itself, and that you can actually play with that in the novel. It's something, for example, it's all over Henry James, that idea almost of a secret or someone who's holding something from someone, if known, will be explosive. But if you bring that down a bit more, even into the more domestic sphere, the idea, especially I think in a talkative community or a talkative society, that talk is often a way of masking what's really being felt. And that what's really being felt sometimes is inexpressible. It's best left to itself. And once that begins, children learn it. Everyone learns it. And it becomes a mode of being. And so I'm talking about that from life as much as from literature. But I'm saying that in the novel, you can actually explore it and sort of almost deal with it or dramatize it or perhaps even exploit it. So it sort of has two, one being that it's true and one being that it's almost useful,
You've mentioned in interviews readers who have responded and said that they found Eilish frustrating as a character for that very reason, that she's so recessive in her own kind of personal wants and needs, and to a certain extent an innocent. Was that a deliberate decision?
Yeah, the plot demands it in that, I don't want to give the whole plot away, but if you have someone who, when she comes home from America, is afraid to tell them something that really anyone might just the first day say, by the way, there's something you need to know. Someone who doesn't do that is somebody who therefore has to be created almost timid. But I was also interested in the power of the timid in fiction, in books that I was reading and thinking about, such as Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, where there's a scene in the middle where Fanny Price is left sitting on a seat. No one cares about her. People think that she's not of any interest. She seems a powerless person of no great intelligence, and yet her ability to feel and to render her own feelings to herself is very great. So slowly the book takes on its power by the reader joining her, in some way or other, within the sort of depth of her feeling. It's since the whole purpose of the novel almost is to be anti-heroic, that we've had enough heroes, and to have someone who's not heroic, who's not able for life in certain ways, and it's easy to push her around, and to have someone like that as the protagonist of a book, even though she might frustrate the reader who thinks she should, what should she do? No, she's not going to do that, actually. She's going to go back to her room and be very, very quiet.
But it's interesting. Early on, you show us with her family, and she has a real gift for making her mother and her sister laugh. She has a good ear for the kind of idiosyncrasies of the town around her. In her comfort zone, it's almost as if you're suggesting that she could blossom, and then you take her from that.
Yeah, I was being careful with that, where when herself and her friend are at the dance, even though they're having a sort of horrible time, they're falling around laughing. And even later on, when she's on the beach back in Ireland with her friend, they're actually just great. And the whole cocoon of the family is, I suppose the cocoon of a small town and the cocoon of a small family actually suit her. But the business of going out into the great world is something that doesn't suit her. So that I think that you've got to be careful to play with contrast there. It's not as though she's someone who permanently is sitting in a room brooding over things. That before she begins that, which she does do in America, she actually has a home, a place where she belongs, where she feels immensely comfortable. And you've got to set that up very clearly in the book.
Did you base her on women you know?
she's partly based on myself in that I think anyone who comes down in a family, who's not the oldest, like I'm fourth in a family of 5, so no matter where I ever go, what I ever do, I can be just pushed around, and I feel psychologically that I'm the person who, I'm always trying to catch up with the others, and if someone is reading, they're turning the page before I have finished it. You know what I mean? And so to that extent, I'm using things I know from childhood or from adolescence or perhaps even still. That I had aunts where the older one would have been more powerful than the other one, and I would have watched all that. But a lot of it is invention as well.
The book is a book of contrasts between her Irish experience and her American one. But the thing that seems to permeate it is, notwithstanding the family connections, there's a kindness in the way she's received in America, for the most part, not from her landlady or the people she lives with, but from some of the people she meets, that's kind of absent from the Irish community. Is that a deliberate decision?
I suppose it is deliberate in one way or other, in that I have a real memory. I don't want to mention anyone's name, but I have a real memory of shopkeepers being sort of snobbish and horrible in small towns and serving rich people before poor people. And I may be wrong about that, but I do remember it. And but also I was interested in what the reader's expectation would be, that in a novel, when she's so far away from home, if she meets a guy, he should turn out to have a shady side. He should turn out to, some way or other, betray her, say, as in a Thomas Hardy novel, say, he'll do something appalling in the end, or that she won't know. But I was interested in the idea of American charm. Irish charm is not to be trusted. No, I mean that if a guy in Ireland was really charming, going on smiling all the time, you'd just watch him for a while, and you'd wait till he got drunk. And then a monster would emerge, and the curse. I mean, especially for a woman like her in the 50s, he would start using bad language, or he'd be awful. Or if you married him, he'd grow suddenly silent, and he'd spend his time staring at you and, being mean and horrible. And, so she keeps watching this guy she meets in America for signs of this. And then it turns out that his charm is real, that he means it. And she's very puzzled by this. She's oddly attracted to it, but she's just wondering about what's beneath it. And then discover there's almost nothing beneath it. It is just charm. And then you wonder, is that good enough? Is that worth, And the other character is the priest. And I suppose I was pretty interested in doing this, where I didn't want to apply a contemporary system, to where everyone, if you put a priest in a novel, we know what the priest is going to get up to in the novel, It's like if you put the priest on a front page of a newspaper now, he's not blessing children, he's not blessing the new building, he's in court for some purpose or other. And I didn't want to go there with that. I thought that this was that great numbers of Irish priests had worked with immigrant communities, tirelessly, selflessly, over the years, and I wanted to sort of just put that into the book. And if there were other things going on, then it's none of my business in this book. Just that happened in so many immigrant communities. And I suppose I wanted to not simply honour that as a sort of, but also to wrong foot the reader if the reader thought Father Flood is going to get up to something horrible very soon. No, he isn't.
In the past, I've read interviews where you've been quite resistant to the notion of Irish identity being a kind of central theme for understanding your work, and yet in Brooklyn it seems to be your book that's most overtly concerned with that notion of Irishness. Do you think that's a useful?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about Irish identity. I mean, I'm from County Wexford, and I have to say that I would have a deep horror. I mean, I couldn't imagine what it'd be like. I mean, I'm sure people from County Waterford and Wicklow and Carlow are wonderful, but they seem very distant and foreign from me. So, in other words, I'm from Wexford. I suppose I'm Irish as well. And you learn a lot about that if you're away from Ireland. In other words, you don't think about Ireland when you're in it. just seems normal. It just rains and it's just miserable. And but you take that rain and misery and you take it as normal. In other words, you don't have great summers and you don't have great food, and people moan a lot. And I started to go to America. I started to drift into America just by working for a few. I worked for a few semesters at American universities. And it sounds like a great idea. You get a gorgeous letter from somebody inviting you, and everything is great. They give you a nice house, and they're charming. God, are they charming. And but then on the third morning you wake up, you think, what am I doing here? And then you suddenly realize that students think you're the biggest foreigner they've ever seen in their lives, that your accent and your manners and the whole way you go on is so different from the way they go on, I mean, I remember one of the first days I was teaching where someone said something so stupid in the class, and I just said, these were actually postgraduate students, and I said, well, does anyone at this seminar have anything intelligent to say on this subject? And they just said, whoa, And I realized, okay, you're in a different country, and they would do imitations of me, but it was the Irishness that seemed to come to the fore, and so I suppose by being away from it, I suppose I got it more than I would if I were there. It's the secret history of Ireland in a way. It's in a way over the last 150 years, it's more significant than, say, independence or the battle with England, to gain independence, is that secret history within families of one or two leaving in each generation, or even more leaving in each generation, and that has happened over the last 150 years, and it's happening again at the moment. And at the moment, I presume you're aware of it here, the number of Irish people arriving here, and because people are not going to the United States anymore because of just the great difficulties that have been created by immigration policy in the United States. But in Toronto, for example, it's filled with Irish who've arrived in the last 6 months, in the last year. Young people coming out of school or college who have skills, but there's no work for them. And what they're doing is they're going. And that's the history. And that doesn't happen, say, in the north of England in the same way. If you're in Northumberland or you're in Yorkshire, you don't just go with the same facility. But it's happening again in Ireland. It's happening at the moment because of economic downturn.
The other story of Brooklyn that really interests me comes from Eilish's situation as a young woman travelling on her own in the early 50s. And we've discussed her kind of self-denial, and repression is probably too strong a word, but what role do you think gender and sexuality played for women in her situation?
Well, you see, from my point of view, it's essential, because if she's a young man going to America in those years, she finds a bar. She finds he finds a bar. He finds a bar. He finds a group of friends. They spend their time meeting at the weekend, drinking. They spend their time masking whatever they would feel. And they get into camaraderie. They get into sport. They would have a life where almost solitude would not be an important part of their lives. But a young woman going in these years does not have those possibilities in the 1950s, where the public world is something that she has to negotiate constantly. And one of the ways in which she negotiates it, and there's a huge amount of discussion in the book, are about clothes. Because my mother had two younger sisters, and they would arrive in the house and they would talk for hours about style, they used to call it. And I was a little boy, I loved them going on about it. And they would coats and sales in Dublin and nylon stockings and costumes and cardigans. And so that becomes almost a code for a certain sort of insecurity that if you're a guy, I mean, you just might go and get your hair cut every so often, and maybe wash under your arms when the time was required, but that other than that, you wouldn't be bothered how you looked.